Hey, what's going on, guys? So welcome back. So in the last video we saw how we can use um, optional chaining and knowledge coalescing operator to handle null and undefined values in a deeply nested object or in a JavaScript code generally. So, and it's really cool that we're able to handle all of that in just one single line of code. So in this video, I want us to start talking about promises. Now, promises, I consider it relatively advanced concept in JavaScript, but it lays a strong foundation for um, a lot of cool things that we're able to do with JavaScript. So it's important we talk about it now. Um, I mean, if you type what is promise in JavaScript, you're going to get a ton of really confusing explanations, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. So in JavaScript code, there are times when you know JavaScript code involves tasks that really take some time to complete. So let's take, for instance, you are writing code that makes an API call to an external server or tries to connect to a database, or let's say you're trying to read from you're trying to read from a file, or you're trying to write to a file. all of this are all of these tasks involve some entity outside your code, right? Basically, we call them side effects. So basically you are um, trying to interact with some external elements, right? And this takes some time. And when we say this takes some time, we're not talking about like um, hours or minutes. We're talking about a couple of seconds, right? And there is something called asynchronous programming. So imagine that the time it takes for these operations to complete, your entire code just freezes, right? So let's say you are trying to make an API call and your entire code freezes, and then you're not able to do anything else until the API call is completed. I mean, it's going to really give a frustrating user experience, and that is where the concept of asynchronous programming comes in, where you are able to go on with the rest of your code, or where your code goes on to execute the rest of the tasks while waiting for those other tasks that take longer time to finish. And then it has a way of returning the value from those tasks when it is completed, right? Now that is what promise is basically. So promise provides a way for us to handle those values. Basically, we put the value that we are expecting from those operations in a promise, so that we can always access it when the task is completed, right? Now it can be two ways. The task can be completed successfully, or the task can fail, right? So if the task is completed successfully, we say that the promise is resolved, and then if the task fails, we say the promise is rejected. So um, the whole concept of promise is all about handling the value from those tags that take longer, because let's say you are trying to read a text file. Now because you are reading from the disk, the text file is probably stored in the disk, and then you are reading from the disk, and then you want to use the text from the file in your code, right? Now if you try to access it immediately, it's going to return an error because it's probably not done reading the file. So we can access it through a promise. So basically, whenever the code is done reading the file, it returns the text file as a promise, as a value that the promise resolves to, and then we are able to access it. If we try to access it before it is done reading it, we're going to get undefined, because at that point the value is not there, basically. So that's the whole concept of promise, and we're going to see how. Let's look at this, for instance. So let's say const data, we say we call a function called fetch data. So let's say we have a function called fetch data, right? Sorry. And then we try to do console.log. Actually, let's do clg, and then we say data. Now, if we try to access this, so let's say this function is the function that tries to read our text file. If we try to log this immediately, it is going to return undefined, or it's going to throw some errors. So it would really make sense, this code would make sense if the reading of the text file is something that happens immediately, but because it takes time, we have to handle it in a way that we are able to access it whenever it is done reading it, and we don't freeze our code just waiting for us to waiting for it to finish reading. Our code can go on to execute other tags that doesn't involve this fetching of data. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so there is the traditional way of handling it, and that is callback. So let's implement this function using a callback to mimic a promise. So of course we can have it here. Let's log out the function call. Now, so basically callback is a function that you pass as an argument, as a parameter to another function, right? So let's create that our function. Actually, we can use arrow function now. Let's use regular function. So let's say a function is fetch data. And it's gonna take a callback. Okay. So our fetch data is gonna take a callback, and then the callback is basically going to, okay, so let's create that delay. We can use set timeout to create delay. So set timeout. Now set timeout takes a function, and so set timeout takes a function, and hold on. Yeah, a callback function. So what the callback function is going to do is just going to say const data, and this is the data that, let's assume this is the data that we want to fetch, and then we'll say text file content. Let's just call it text file content, and then we are going to set so this is going to run after 2 seconds, 2000 milliseconds basically, which is 2 seconds, and then this is fine. Then we pass our callback, right? So, and then we say callback is going to take data, right? So basically what we are doing is we have a function, and then that function takes a callback. Now callback is a function, right? And then we are calling that function and passing data. I hope that makes sense. Now when we call our function, we are going to pass that callback. So we say result, and then excuse me, we're gonna do console.log, and then we're gonna say data from file, and we are going to do this, and then we'll say result. course we're gonna have to put this. Actually, we can do this. Okay, since it's a console statement, you can just use comma to separate it. Okay, so now we can call our fetch data. So okay, so let's explain what's going on here. We have a function called fetch data, and that function is taking if another function. We're passing another function as a parameter, right? Now we are now using set timeout to create a delay. So basically, after 20 seconds, no, this is after 2 seconds, our function just um, we invoke this callback. So when we call this fetch data function, we pass a function as an argument, and that function takes the data, which is basically what we are expecting from our callback, and basically we are logging that data to the console. Now if we check our console, hold on. So you see, immediately after 2 seconds, we get data from text file. Let's try to see that again. Just after 2 seconds, that's when it logs to the console. So think of this as making a call to API. It can take 2 seconds. It can take less than that. Okay, but the point is it takes some time. Now, imagine that we have another code. So let's log out something before we fetch the data. So let's say const before fetch, let's put it in a string, and then we say console.log after fetch. Now if you look at the console, you see we logged before fetch, we logged after fetch, and then we logged the data from file, which is the result of our our set timeout operator, or our asynchronous operation. So basically what it's saying is we didn't have to wait for this guy to finish executing. This guy takes 2 seconds to execute. We didn't have to wait for it to finish. It went ahead and ran the call on line 98. So it started with line 96, it ran this, and then this guy started, right? Remember, calling this function takes 2 seconds to return a value, right? It takes 2 seconds to return a value, so we didn't have to wait for that 2 seconds to finish, and then he went ahead and ran this, right? That's what we are seeing here. It ran after fetch on line 98, which is this one. And then when our 2 seconds elapsed, he now returned the data from this guy, right? Okay, so this is how you would use a callback to handle asynchronous operation. So we used set timeout here to mimic that delay that could happen when we are actually interacting with an external server, maybe a database server, to read or write data, or an external API call to fetch data, basically. So that's how they create it. Now, where does promise come in all of this? Okay, so because we don't even want to use set timeout here, we use set timeout and we specified 2 seconds. Sometimes the operations can take more than 2 seconds. So basically, so what if after 2 seconds the operation is not done? So basically, we don't manually set timeout because it's an operation that is happening outside of our code. We can't really control how long it takes a lot of the times. So if you are writing to a database server, you might not really control how long it takes, so you can't set a timeout like this. So basically you would do something like you use a promise. So because we are actually not interacting to a database yet, we are still going to use set timeouts to mimic that delay. But let's see how we would let's see how a promise can you know, let's see how where promise is coming. So a promise is a JavaScript syntax. So what we can do here, we can say, instead of using callbacks, we can use a promise. And the way promises work is we say return. So we return new promise. Okay, we say return new promise, and new promise takes it takes a callback which takes two parameters, basically resolve and rejects. Okay, and so we can now excuse me. So we can still put our our set timeout operation here, but it's gonna be a little bit different. It's not gonna be we're not gonna be using a callback anymore. Instead, we are going to be calling either of this. So we can say, so instead of this, we call our resolve. So we say resolve, and then we say data. Okay, so we are not using callback now, we are using promise, and we should actually get similar results. Okay, so now it's now the difference is in how we remember. When we used callback, we basically have to pass that callback function when we call fetch, but now here it is different. So to get this we are going to do something like we're gonna do this. So you're gonna go this way. We'll say fetch data. We'll call it as a function. That's what it is. And remember, it returns a promise. Because it returns a promise, to get the value of that promise, to get the value of that promise, basically promise is a value that we get at a later time, literally. So we say dot then, and then we pass a callback, and then the value is going to be the value that we are expecting, the value that the promise, the actual value of the promise. So we say results, and then we can now do so we can do console.log results. Okay, so we just say data from file, and then we say results. Okay, and this should do it. Now if we check our console again, we basically get the same behavior, right? So we get the line 96 runs, and then it queues this guy and waits for the operation to complete. Basically we are waiting after 2 seconds because there's really no external operation happening. We're just delaying it to create that delay effect. We're using set timeout to create that delay effect. So wait 2 seconds, and then but while waiting, this is the whole point. While waiting, this guy still has to run, right? This guy still runs. So we didn't have to wait until everything finished here before this guy runs. So this guy continues to run, and after 2 seconds this guy runs. That's the sequence. So we get this, and then we get this, even though this started before this, but because it took longer. I hope that makes sense, guys. Okay, so that's the way to handle it with a promise. So every time you see a function call and then you see dot then, just know that you are trying to assess or trying to call a function that returns a promise, trying to assess the value of that function, basically. So yep, that's promise. Now there's even a neater way to do this. You can actually have dot catch. just in case there is an error, so you can do dot then, and then you can come here and do dot catch if there is an error. Okay, so but we can keep it here for now. Now there is a neater way to do this, and um, that is why the other way to do it is we can use something called async and await. So basically a neater syntax for solving the same problem. Okay, so async await, um, let's see how we would do this with async await. Oh, you know what, this is a lot of this is a lot of information already, so maybe in the next video, I will show you how you can, do all of this with async await. But for now, just to recap, we started by talking by talking about asynchronous tags in JavaScript. So basically, we talked about side effects. So basically, we know that in JavaScript code, yeah, sometimes we want to, our code involves tags that take time to complete, and most of those tags are what we call side effects. They are mostly our code reaching out to some external entities, and sometimes it takes time to complete such operation, like reading or writing to a file, making call to external APIs, or writing, maybe calling a database, right? So these things take time, and we don't want all of our code to freeze while waiting for these operations to complete. So that's where asynchronicity of the JavaScript programming language really shines. So it continues to execute the rest of the code while waiting for that other tags that take time to complete. And when it completes, we're able to access the value of that operation in a promise, right? So promise is a way for us to handle the value that is returned from those operations. So we can go on to do what we are doing, and then we know we have a promise. Basically, we have a promise that will return the value of that task when it is completed. I hope this makes sense. Okay, so it was one of the tricky parts of JavaScript for me to grasp when I was learning, and I really wanted to take some time and really try to explain it in a way that makes sense. Please drop a comment, drop your thoughts in the comment section, and let me know if this is clear, and if you still have questions, drop it in the comment section and I'll try to explain it. So this is sufficient for all of your tasks that involve promises, but maybe in a later video I'm going to show you how you can use async await to get even neater syntax. So I'll see you guys in the next video.